episode 4 of I'll Allow It, Nevada. In this episode, we will be discussing H2O, Nevada water law. I'm Anne-Marie Mayu, Judicial Education Program Specialist, your host. And joining me as co-host is David Gordon, Judicial Education Director. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. As you mentioned, in this episode, we're going to spend some time on a subject our listeners shouldn't find too dry. It's water law. We'll try not to get too extreme with the puns because we'll be talking about water law the whole time, and we want to avoid any kind of peer pressure. The Nevada Supreme Court filed an order in December of 2022 establishing a requirement for the AOC to set up a judicial education curriculum that's going to be part of the certification requirement for water law judges. It's a case of investing time in water law education to provide more liquid assets so we can stay current. The order becomes effective in January of 2023 and is intended to provide a cadre of qualified water law judges to hear water law cases and establish a bank of water law cases that may be cited for their persuasive value. We'll be joined today by Justice Ron Paragary of the Nevada Supreme Court and Ann Walsh-Long, the director of the Supreme Court Law Library. There's a lot of depth to this topic, but we will keep it conversational and just go with the flow. So, Justice Paragary, can you tell us what's behind the effort to certify Nevada judges as water law judges?
Yes. As you know, David, the Nevada Supreme Court has been in the forefront for many, many years in bettering the administration of justice and access to justice in courts throughout the state. We started specialty courts. We were some of the first in the country in the 80s. Judge Jack Lehman and Judge Peter Breen were some of the first in the country to begin specialty courts with drug courts, mental health courts. It's now evolved into veterans courts to better serve the citizens and the litigants in the state in these specialized areas. In the 90s, there was a need to look at the family court structure, and so the legislature created the family courts, and the Supreme Court was involved in a lot of aspects in creating the family court to recognize that those cases are special. They affect so many people in such a personal and emotional level. We needed to make sure that we had a structure there to make those cases efficiently heard and by specialized judges. So the family court was another example. The business courts that we created in the urban jurisdictions were designed. Nevada is recognized as a business-friendly state, just like Delaware is. So we created business courts in Clark and Washoe County to expedite those types of cases. Those business cases need to be resolved if we're going to be business-friendly, and they need to be expedited to the best that we can. And we've got specialized judges that hear those cases, but it wasn't the legislature stepping in and creating a particular bank of courts. We did that with our existing resources. So that's another example. So the water law cases, some years ago, well, I guess it was 2021, then Chief Justice Hardesty was approached by a number of interested individuals. The legislature was interested in creating some type of a specialized court for these very complex cases. Justice Hardesty created this Water Law Commission, and it was made up of various, very diverse users, so to speak. And so it was well represented by agriculture, by conservation, by the attorneys that are specialized practitioners, the state engineer, intertribal council. We had rural judges. We had rural water users. It was a very significant group of individuals who made up the composition of this commission. So that's kind of how this began, is what is this going to look like? Do we want to create a specialized court? Do we want to come up with some different models? Many of the Western states have been out there and they've done this already. So we could take certain aspects of what they have created and bring that to Nevada. So that's kind of how this started. And so the commission has wrapped up its work, and we have come up with a model that we're going to test. We're going to do a pilot program for 3 years based upon a model that the commission agreed upon.
And you mentioned specialty courts and specialized judges. There's a difference between water courts and water law judges. Is that right?
Yes. Water law courts would need to be created by the legislature. The model that the commission actually landed upon is specialized, specially trained judges from throughout the state to hear these cases rather than creating a specialized court.
I know that in Nevada, we have a concern with vested water rights. Can you talk a little bit about vested rights?
Nevada and all the western states abide by what's known as prior appropriation. Most of the other states, the eastern states, are riparian rights, were generally recognized prior appropriation. And so that's basically first in time, first in right. Before the laws were created really regulating water rights, they're public waters, but there's rights that you have a beneficial use of these public waters. Vested rights are basically pre-statutory rights from 1905, 1913 for groundwater and surface water. And so all those rights existing have senior priorities over anybody else. After 1913, the statutes would come into play and you make an application for a beneficial use of water with ultimately the state engineer to get permits or certificates to use the water.
And there's a deadline coming up at the end of 2027 for people who have vested rights to ensure that everything is recognized. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, a municipality that has come along after someone has their prior rights appropriated, they're secondary to, say a city such as Elko that's downstream of somebody who has rights for a ranch in Elko County. The municipal water supply takes a back seat to that ranch. Is that right?
That's prior appropriation.
Justice Bergary, I was recently at an out-of-state training, and when I mentioned water law, most of the people there were from the East, and they acted as if they'd never heard of such a thing. Ironically, the person who really connected with me on it was a law professor from Singapore, because apparently Singapore gets all of their water from Malaysia, and they're in the middle of a 100-year agreement, but someday that agreement's going to expire also. So water law is something very important to us, but there are other diverse areas, such as a tropical island that's nearly on the equator, that have water issues. So last December, you attended the conference Dividing the Waters in Santa Fe, New Mexico, along with about 10 other Nevada judges. That concentrates on the Colorado River. Can you talk a little bit about what happened at that conference and how you're integrating some of the material that you heard there?
Well, the conference was fascinating, and the history on the Colorado River is fascinating. And, Nevada has a very, very small appropriation on the Colorado River, and most of Las Vegas's needs come from the Colorado River. And what I stepped away from that conference with was an understanding that Las Vegas, being so specifically dependent upon that resource, they have gone over and above. They're recognized throughout the country as a model for conservation.
Oh, that's different than most people's perception, that they are actually making good use of that water.
It was different than the perception that I had. I just came away really proud of what they had done to conserve this precious resource. Again, they are a model throughout the country. We've done well with the allocation that we've got, as minuscule as it is.
Let me go back to water law courts and water law judges. There are some states that have established water law courts.
Mm-hmm.
Montana, I believe, is that right?
Yes.
And other states, for instance, I believe Utah has gone with water law judges, specialized judges. Is that right?
I believe so.
And you met with these folks at the Dividing the Waters conference. Some of them were in attendance as well.
Yes, and I was particularly interested in their education programs. As part of the commission's task, our Water Law Commission, we had to come up with a curriculum. We want our judges specially trained and very well trained. And Dividing the Waters and the National Judicial College will be putting together programs. And then, of course, our first education program will be through the administrative office of the courts.
And that's a 2-day program that's happening in October of 2023, where we're providing a basic understanding of hydrogeology and prior appropriation. But we're also working out some education on case management specific to water law. Is there anything judges should know about how water law case management is different?
It's really hard. They're very complex cases, David. You know, when I first came on this court in 2004 or 5, I was a brand new justice, and I got this whole series of water law cases. I knew nothing about water law. And it's such a complex area.
It surprises me you didn't know about water law. You grew up here.
I did. Well, and I knew basics of water law, but these were very complex cases that just dropped in my chambers. You know, all the cases that we get into chambers are randomly assigned. And so I was really skeptical because I had this series of cases, these very difficult cases. And so I thought I was being hazed. I thought, but the more I got into these cases, the more I found them fascinating. And once you understand that body of law, it becomes so much more manageable when you're handling these cases. And so the whole concept of having our judges specially trained and understanding these basic terms and this body of water law that Nevada has specific to Nevada, I think is going to make a tremendous difference in the way these cases are managed. And there's going to be, with all of our over-appropriated basins and the adjudications of these water rights that have to occur within this period of time, we're going to be inundated at some point. So I think it's a very necessary thing for us to be looking forward.
Okay, I'm going to let you have the inundated pun on this one.
Unintended.
So our water law judges, we will have a limited number certified as water law judges, but they'll be able to hear cases anywhere in the state. Is that correct?
Yes, generally. They will be able to hear cases anywhere in the state, but hopefully the jurisdictions, the rural jurisdictions, will have certified judges to hear their cases. The cases should be heard where the case arises. And so if you've got two judges in a rural jurisdiction, neither one is certified, then according to our rules, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court can utilize another certified judge from another jurisdiction to come into that jurisdiction and hear the case.
Some of the water law cases are going to require the participation of expert witnesses. What kind of expert witnesses are you going to be seeing on these water law cases?
Oh, you're going to see hydrologists, you're going to see any number of, depending on the nature of the case. It depends, David.
Is there anything else that you would like judges to know, particularly about our efforts here to certify water law judges?
I think I'd like to see more and more of these judges take the education, and you're really going to enjoy this aspect of law. It's complex, but it's fascinating, and it's so very, very important to this state that we need you.
And how about public trust? How are we going to portray this to the public and educate them about our efforts?
We're making an effort. I think that goes a long way to show that we have a concern about this very precious resource, and we are doing everything we can to be able to manage this resource through these litigations that are going to take place. We're ready. We want to be ready. We want to be able to expedite these cases. This is a start. As I said, we're going to pilot this program for 3 years, and we are going to generate reports throughout the various jurisdictions indicating what they've done and study it. And I've taken over as chair of the commission with Justice Hardesty's retirement. And so we'll be monitoring this for the next 3 years. We'll have continued meetings and check in as we need to.
And after 3 years, an evaluation will be made, and we'll decide whether to continue the program, whether to expand the program. Is
That's
that right?
And 3 years from now, if this doesn't seem to be working, then it may be something else. It may look entirely different. It may be that the legislature steps in and says, we want to create dedicated water courts, or this model works just fine. Let's put it into full production.
And right now we're concentrating on active sitting judges to be certified as water law judges. We're not looking to expand to senior judges right now.
That's right.
These issues are also important to the bar. How has the bar received this information?
For the most part, well. We had a number of practitioners on the commission from rural jurisdictions, urban jurisdictions, And I think the thought of having specially educated judges is universally received amongst the members of the bar who practice in this area.
Okay, Justice Paragari, I think we're going to wrap up. Is there anything else that you want to say in conclusion?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you very much for this, and we're gonna continue on with some more efforts here. But thank you for your time.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Justice Paragari, for sharing your knowledge today. We just want to take a moment to remind you that we will be publishing a new podcast episode of I'll Allow It Nevada on the third Friday of every month. I'll Allow It Nevada can be found on many of the streaming sites, including YouTube, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and many more. If you have any questions or comments, or if you would like to suggest a topic, please send that information to the JE Podcast email at jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov.
Now I'd like to welcome Ann Walsh-Long, the Director of the Supreme Court Law Library. We have some questions that are specifically tailored to the library's role related to water law education. And the Supreme Court Law Library has made some acquisitions of material related to water law in support of our efforts. Can you tell us about that?
I'd love to, David. The Law Library has about 500 titles just on water law, and those are print resources that we have in our collection. Water law is such a complex and fluid area of law that water can be categorized in numerous ways. It can be groundwater, it can be surface water, it can be navigable or not. And the way that water is used has evolved and changed over the years. So a lot of the resources that we have in our collection kind of discuss and explore those issues throughout time. And so we've got a good depth of collection of water titles. So it's nice because it's not something that you can just dive into and know exactly what you're doing. You really do kind of have to do quite a bit of research to get up to speed.
Nice work on the puns, Ann.
Thanks.
In addition to print material, the library can also provide access to a number of digital and subscription-based services. How can judges and law clerks make use of those resources?
Well, because we are located in Carson City, of course, your library card can check out any of our print resources. And those get checked out in drips and drabs. But you can have a deluge of our digital resources right at your desktop. The same library card does provide access to our LexisNexis digital library, and we have several water law titles in addition to hundreds of other titles that not only judges and the bench and the bar can access, but anyone who lives in Nevada or is licensed in Nevada can access those resources through the library card. We've also recently added a water right and resources collection through Hein Online. That's just available here on site in the library. And it mostly focuses on kind of federal content, such as legislative histories of the Clean Water Act, U.S. Supreme Court briefs, CRS materials, everything related to that area of law. Years ago, I was a librarian at the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C., and actually was responsible for the Office of Water library materials. So I'm fairly familiar with these materials on a federal level. Getting to know resources available to states and western states has also been really great, and we're trying to develop that collection to make sure we address Nevada's water rights.
Well, Ann, it sounds like you have a flood of information available on this. But I've heard about LibGuides. Can you tell us about a LibGuide and really about the uses for one?
Yeah. So librarians put together LibGuides or library guides. Several decades ago, you would walk into the library and pull a sheet from the desk on whatever topic you were interested in, and all the call numbers to those resources would be available so you could wander around the library and find what you needed. Today, however, we have so many digital resources from so many different vendors, it's somewhat difficult to identify the resources you need. So that's where the law library really helps out. We have subscriptions to all the major vendors and a lot of cross-disciplinary research and vendor content as well. So when the justices are crafting their arguments, when attorneys are looking for support, of course you want something that's authoritative and primary, but there isn't always available case law to support your argument. So you have to turn to secondary sources. Secondary sources are often more scholarly in nature. There are a lot of periodicals, there are books, a lot of different resources, and they are published by different vendors. And so the different vendors will provide access to different databases. What a LibGuide does is collect all the various vendor resources and make them available in one spot. So example, if you are reading through a decision from the Nevada Supreme Court, it's going to reference periodicals, it's going to reference other research. We're trying to build a database or a LibGuide that will include all of those resources so that attorneys that are doing this type of research kind of have a one-stop shop to get everything they need from one resource. So that's what the goal of our content that we're trying to build.
It's almost like a digest of material that's available that's related to a particular subject.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And secondary sources are collected in it as well as the primary sources.
Exactly right, yes.
Okay. Does the library have resources that are related to vested water rights, the ones that were in place before March 22nd, 1913?
We do. And it's interesting, Justice Paragary mentioned that water law, of course, as all of our law did, came from the East, came from the UK, and has kind of moved westward. But our use of water and our need for water is very different. And so the common law that developed in the East is very different than what we have developed here in the West. And a lot of the resources that we have are from the 1800s or, pre-1913. That kind of discuss and explore all of those issues that were in effect at that time in the Western states.
Okay, thanks. I know I've mentioned to you my experience in college where I took a library orientation course a couple of years into it, and I should have done it at the beginning. But can you tell the listeners what kind of resources and assistance are available through the library and how the judges and law clerks might become more familiar with library services?
The best place to start would be at our website at nvcourts.gov/law library. You can also send us an email at reference@nvcourts.nv.gov. And that's going to be kind of how we support everybody that's available. Our website will link to our catalog that links to all of our print and digital resources. It also relates to all of our research guides or LibGuides on specialty topics that can help support research. And we're available 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, except for state holidays. You can call us, you can email us, you can chat with us. We've got a number of access points on how you can reach out to us other than just coming into the law library.
And along those lines, I know that the Supreme Court Law Library issues physical library cards, but users don't necessarily need those, do they?
Well, they don't. As a matter of fact, you can get a library card online. If you ever stop by the library, you can pick it up, but all you really need is that barcode to log into our LexisNexis digital library. And you can take care of that all from our website.
Great, thank you. Is there anything in the collection in the library that's related to water law that might surprise some of your customers?
I think the most surprising thing is how quickly you can get yourself in over your head, which again is why the law library is here to support everyone. People practice in Nevada went to law school throughout the country. And so depending on where they're coming from, we have the resources to support you, and we've got the staff that can help you out with your legal research needs. So start with us. It's going to save you a lot of time, and hopefully we can direct you to the resources you need.
And I'd really like to thank you for taking the time to talk to our listeners. Is there anything else that you want them to know as we get ready to wrap this up?
I think that just about covers it. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
I just want to thank Justice Paragary for coming and Anne for being here. We just have a Niagara of information.
A Niagara. Very, very good. Anne-Marie just took the plunge over the falls. Thank you very much for listening to this. And again, appreciation to Justice Paragary and to Ann Walsh-Long. This has been a really fun podcast to do. There is a lot of information about water law, and I think we're probably going to be circling back to this topic later on.
Absolutely. Hopefully we have quenched your thirst with all this information. Just remember that we do publish a podcast the third Friday of every month, so stay tuned. We've got more coming. And if you would like CLE credit for this, please complete the certificate of attendance and email it into our Judicial Education Podcast email. That's jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. David, thank you so much for co-hosting with me today.
You're welcome, Anne-Marie, and thank you for inviting me. I'd also like to remind listeners that at that same email address, jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov, is where we'd like to get ideas from you, our listeners, about topics. Anything you want us to explore, anything you want to learn more about, or anything that you want to participate in, we can use you in these recordings. Thank you.
Stay tuned for another episode of I'll Allow It, Nevada.